Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education University, and I'm your host, Tim Bogats. Have you ever been surrounded by 500,000 Lego pieces? That's actually the situation I'm in right now, and it's both fascinating and overwhelming. I'm in Canada, Toronto, Ontario, to be specific, in the studio of Ekow Nimako, a sculptor who builds some incredible works using Lego elements. Now, I'm here because Ekow will be one of our featured presenters at the Now conference in July. So we brought our video team up here to Toronto to see Ekow in action, talk to him about his work, and put together that presentation for Now. As they are getting everything set up, I'm hanging out in the studio and recording this. And I have to say, I have loved every minute of looking around his studio, seeing some finished work in person, and seeing some sculptures in progress. You know, I want to let Ekow explain his work in his own words, and I definitely don't want to give away any secrets. So I'll just leave it there and not say too much more about the artworks. But I think we are ready. I think it's about time for us to get to the interview. Ekow is here and ready to go, and we're going to chat about his art, his working process, his influences and inspiration, and whatever else may come up along the way. And also how one acquires so many Lego pieces. So let's go ahead and get this conversation started. All right, I'm here in the studio with Ekow Nimako. Ekow, how are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here.
All right, well, I am happy to talk to you. A lot that we want to get to, a lot that we want to talk about. I guess to start with, in case people are unfamiliar, if they don't know your work, can you just share a little bit about your sculptures, maybe the look, the aesthetic of what you do, materials, size? Just give us a rundown of everything you create.
Certainly. So again, my name is Ekow Nimako. I am a visual artist, multidisciplinary artist. I currently have a practice that revolves around building sculptures using Lego elements. My featured series called Building Black explores various elements of mythology and African civilizations, mask-making traditions, and even graffiti, all using various Black Lego elements.
All right. And everybody can see your stuff on Instagram on ekownimako.com.
Yes.
So if you want to pause and look through all of that stuff before you listen to the rest of this episode, feel free to do that. But before we dive in a little bit more with your work and things like that, I would love to hear just a little bit more about you personally. Like, can you talk about, where you grew up, where you went to school, maybe things you used to do before you became an artist?
That's a good question. Before I became an artist, well, I guess you could say I've always been an artist.
Right.
I was born an artist, and an artist I shall die. I grew up in a few places before I ended up in Toronto when I was about 10 years old. So I was born in Montreal. And then we moved around a bit, smaller communities, St. Catharines, which is just outside Niagara Falls. And then we moved to London, England, actually, for a year, which was a fun experience. And then from London, England, we moved to London, Ontario, which is a small town, a couple hours outside of Toronto. And from London, Ontario, we moved to Toronto. So, I've lived around a bit and had some unique experiences. Like in London, Ontario, it's the first time I encountered subtle and quite explicit racism. And those kind of experiences definitely help inform your worldview, whether you want it to or not. So, and then moving from a community like London, which was predominantly white, to Toronto, which is far more cosmopolitan and diverse community, it was great to be able to have my identity more validated. So yeah, growing up in Toronto definitely helped to foster my interest in like identity and the politics around identity, but also my love of my own West African culture.
Now, as you're moving around so much, was it tough to, fit into those schools? Was it tough for you to sort of develop that identity, or how was it for you moving around, attending a lot of different schools? I guess meeting new people in all these different places.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think I've always liked school. I like the experience of being there. I like learning new things, and the social aspects, of course, are always like fun, and they can provide a really keen outlet for creativity as well. And I found that I thrived in art classes and really enjoyed the process of like meeting new art teachers and figuring out like how they could, bring exciting new ideas, and honestly just like assignments, to draw things, because I just like any other artist, you draw what you like. And when you're given an assignment, sometimes what you're given, the task that you're given isn't what you necessarily want to do.
Right.
And that can be a really good thing, because sometimes we don't actually know, what it is that we want or what it is that we like until you do it. And having met and gone to so many different schools, and therefore met so many different art teachers that, could provide me with very different kind of perspectives on art, was really, really helpful in like developing my own sense of like identity and as a visual artist.
All right. So I'm just thinking about, schooling, creativity, and we talked earlier about, how much you were building with Lego pieces, with Lego elements as a kid. Mm-hmm. Is that something that has just continued your whole life, or did you, do that a bunch as a kid, leave it alone for a while, and then mm-hmm. revisit it now as an artist once you're doing more sculptural things?
Right. Yeah, it did happen that way, actually. So I was about 3 or 4 when I fell in love with Lego play, and I kept doing it right until sometime just after puberty, I guess. Girls became more important to me at that age, and just hanging out with friends. And, I think honestly, if I had friends that were more into like Lego and like geek culture kind of things, I probably would have stuck with it a lot more and kept doing it right through high school and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the case. We were living in areas that like we lived in the hood, like straight up, so like it wasn't that unusual to have encounters of violence like where I was growing up, and limited resources and sometimes limited inspiration. And, the friends that I grew up with ended up, becoming, unfortunately, kind of embroiled in different things, like either in becoming incarcerated or, getting into like fights and stuff like that. So it wasn't my particular angle. That's not what I like ended up doing myself, but my friends were definitely into a whole lot of, let's say, complex activities. So playing with Lego just kind of was my own thing. It was just like a personal thing that I did at home from time to time during mm-hmm. adolescence, but eventually it just became secondary and non-existent to like making music, which became like my number one artistic outlet for a number of years. And then I rediscovered my love of Lego later on in life when I had daughters, and it gave me a reason to like buy more Lego and then like end up playing with Lego with them again. And yeah, things just started to kind of shift and pull me back towards using it as a creative outlet, creative material. And then once I attended York University to study art, it also gave me more opportunities to kind of use Lego elements as part of my artistic process. But it didn't really become a practice for me until about 2012.
And then once it became a practice, as you said, like how long did it take you to really develop your aesthetic, develop your ideas, and kind of get to the point where you are now?
I mean, it took some time. I didn't immediately realize that building black was so important to me. Mm-hmm. You know, the color itself, using black monochromatically, that didn't really take hold until a bit later. In the beginning, I was still kind of caught in the, like, I don't know, the iconic presence of Lego and our Lego material, and just kind of building things with different colors. And I mean, I always knew that I wanted to create life. You know, I wanted to build things that would be indicative of life. I wanted to create sculptures that were not the things that I grew up wanting to make, like robots and vehicles and things like that. Even though I still love robots and vehicles and things like that, I just felt there was a greater calling for me to construct sculptures of, let's say, black children, you know, riding fantastical creatures and things like that. Because I would grow up watching movies like The Never-Ending Story and all of these fantastical movies that had children engaging in adventures and being heroic and doing all these amazing things. But more often than not, they weren't children that looked like me and didn't speak to my particular identity and experiences. So if the material gave me a chance, an opportunity really to create the things that I didn't see growing up, and also just even take it a step further and endow them with like supernatural gifts or like hybridized forms and things like that those things really kind of motivate and inspire me. And as such, I know that they must motivate and inspire so many other people in the world too. Yeah, for sure. Can we dive into that inspiration a little bit more? You know, I talk about The Never-Ending Story. You know, I know that sort of storytelling kind of resonates with you. I know history is a huge part of, you know, what inspires you to create your work. But can you talk about, you know, just everywhere that inspiration comes from? And I would love to hear more about, you know, just the ideas of Afrofuturism and just kind of all the things that go into the work that you create. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I find inspiration in so many places. I'm a huge film buff. I love cinema. I love movies. I love comic books, graphic novels, fiction, literature. And, you know, again, it's like the things that I read and the things that I consumed growing up weren't speaking to me about me necessarily. It was just, you know, generally, of course, just a story about, you know, any particular character doing this thing. But it wasn't until later when I reflect on it, I'm like, yeah, you know, there was that one character that showed someone that looked like me. You know, Star Wars, for example, was really, really influential from like the 80s, 90s, you know, 2000s. Like anytime there was like any kind of Star Wars content, I was really about it. Yeah. But you know, every time something happened, there was a new Star Wars flick or something like that, there was usually the one character that I could say, oh, that looks like me or looks like my uncle or something. Billy D. Williams in the 80s. And then, Mace Windu, of course, in the 90s, played by Samuel L. Jackson, stuff like that, which was really cool that they were there. But, you know, it was an entire galaxy with aliens and humanoids and so many sentient beings. But there was like, you know, one black guy in this massive imagined universe. So it, you know, there's disparities there. And, even examples like, since we're focusing on Star Wars, like the house that, or the little kind of rounded dome desert home that Luke Skywalker lived in and grew up in. It's like, you know, across the spectrum of Star Wars fans, like, it's so like, everyone knows that that's like Luke's home, and you know that's where he grew up. But that domicile is actually located in, I think, Eastern Africa, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's like, and I know Padme, or Princess Amidala, her whole getup, her outfit, her ceremonial robes, they were all almost like identical to a Southeast Asian royalty aesthetic. But so you have all of these cultural items being taken from various ethnic groups around the world to put into this fantastic, futuristic, even though it's not the future, so I guess like historic, imagined universe. But the people that created those things, and I'm not talking about the movie magic people, I mean like the actual people that created these ethnic emblems and garments, they weren't included in the story.
Right.
You know, so again, you have this idea of taking and borrowing from other cultures while ensuring that the people are not a part of that whole storytelling. And that's problematic on so many levels. And you don't really start to think about it until you think critically about what it is that you're consuming, which a lot of people actually don't do. So, and I can understand that, because if the world is just constantly reinforcing the idea that you are important, this particular group is important, and you're at the center of all these stories, but everybody else is just reduced to being like, just, you know, non-key players that are just like floating around, helping to support the main story or the main characters along their trajectory, then you start to feel a little less significant, that your story, that your representation doesn't matter as much, when of course it does. So as much as I love so many things from like the world of fantasy and the world of science fiction, it's important for me to then look at that and say, okay, well, how about I start telling a different kind of story? You know, as this theory that I developed called speculative reclamation, in which you have the case of like some kind of cultural narrative or story or character or person, and it's observed from someone that is foreign to that culture. And then that story is, let's say, taken, right? You can use the example of Robin Hood, let's say, right? So speculative reclamation is when you suppose that that story was actually taken from a different ethnic group. So members of that ethnic group can then speculatively reclaim that story as their own, which I did using that Robin Hood example with a piece called The Bandit Queen of Wallata. And it's when I first did my exhibit, Building Black Civilizations. So it's focused on medieval Africa and the things that were happening in and around like the Sahara Desert, and countries and kingdoms around that period and that geographical location. And I said, you know what if, since the story of Robin Hood, as my research indicates, they don't have like a fixed person that actually wrote the story of Robin Hood. It's more like some kind of folkloric story that just
something
kind of
that gets
passed down.
Right.
So I use speculative reclamation to say, so what if there was someone from England in the Sahara around that same time, and there was a woman, okay, an African woman, a Muslim African woman that escaped enslavement, only to become a fierce warrior of the desert, that then descended upon these slave caravans to free those that have been enslaved, and also provide justice and, you know, disperse those ill-gotten goods amongst the poor and oppressed. And I thought of this story, and I thought it'd be great, and I built this sculpture of this powerful desert queen. And through that, that's how speculative reclamation was born, because who's to say that didn't actually happen? It happens all the time. Our stories, our history, our culture has been appropriated and co-opted so often that sometimes it becomes a little murky as to where the origins of a story actually came from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes our actual historical people that were Black become whitewashed over history and accepted as non-Black people when in fact they actually were. So the theory of speculative reclamation becomes that much more important. Despite the fact that it is speculative, it still offers that opportunity to reclaim some element of your own culture and history and story while presenting it in a way that is like fascinating and cloaked in like mythology and folklore.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. I love hearing about that theory. Gives me a lot to think about. But can you talk a little bit more about the civilizations? I think, what you're creating, what you're building there is fascinating. I got a chance to see some works in progress, which I think are going to be spectacular. But can you just talk a little bit more about that project and what you're creating, what you're building there?
Yeah, certainly. So Building Black Civilizations is this body of work that started when the Aga Khan Museum here in Toronto reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in being a part of an exhibit that they had brought to the museum 8 years in the making. And this exhibit contained works from around the world, but works that were originated on the continent, in sub-Saharan Africa, and represented like all of the various kind of ethnic and cultural artifacts that spoke to that time in history. And the show was called Caravans of Gold, Fragments in Time. And through learning about that show and what that exhibit had to offer and seeing these like, they are artworks, but I do think there is a distinction between like contemporary artworks and like art historical objects. Nonetheless, to kind of see these pieces and then also have the opportunity to kind of interpret them and then come up with my own narrative around that period in time. It was really fascinating and inspiring. So what I did was create this work called Civilization, Building Black Civilizations, where I just created narratives from that period in time that spoke to me. And like I mentioned, the Bandit Queen of Wolata, that was one of the pieces. And a few others, one I called the Scorpion's Pass, which really was just like a real fantastical effort, just saying, what are the perils of the desert, and crossing the desert and knowing that there were these epic like camel caravans that tread through the desert to bring various minerals, art objects, gold, so many things that helped create these powerful kingdoms in West Africa, and by establishing this trade throughout the world. And like the Scorpion's Pass, I thought about the desert and I was like, okay, well, what are the perils of the desert? Well, scorpions, of course. You get a bite from a scorpion, it could be fatal if you're out there in the desert. So I thought, okay, I'll build this sculpture that exemplified this perilous kind of path that travelers could take, but it's also, you may not come out if you go that way. And it was just something really imaginative that I thought would be interesting to highlight the kind of the dangers of these epic journeys that took place. And I'd say the pinnacle of that show was an artwork called Kumbi Saleh 3020 CE, which is a 30 square foot metropolis that I built that is actually a representation of the original city, Kumbi Saleh, which existed in the Kingdom of Ghana in the Middle Ages. And I kind of interpreted it as like a futuristic kind of city.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at it, there's this blending of medieval kind of architecture, Islamic architecture, and at the same time, this kind of futurist,
right,
geometric kind of geography that I brought to the artwork as well. And I was really thankful the artwork was acquired by the Aga Khan Museum and is now a part of their permanent collection. And they've managed to start getting it some traction and moving it around to different institutions, which is great because it becomes this this focal point for a discourse around just like that period in time and how so often Africa as a continent and all the individual countries on the continent are left out of these conversations about global economy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they call it the developing country and things like that. But in fact, it was these kind of civilizations that brought gold and helped to monetize the rest of the world. So in fact, it's not developing country, it developed countries around the world. But because of colonialism and, you know, transatlantic slave trade, and before that, the Arab slave trade, you know, Africa was it just became this place where so much was happening, but so much was taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point now, it's like more and more there's a reclaiming and like this redefining of identity across the continent. And I'm happy to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think it's important to have that conversation. I think it's good to have your work, you know, stimulate or be part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
I think that's really worthwhile. I guess beyond that conversation, beyond the meaning, the inspiration, the influence, you know, I would love to just talk logistics, you know, because I know like our teachers are very curious about, you know, how do you put these together? How do these things work? So, I guess the first question along those lines is, you know, how long does it take you to build some of these sculptures? You know, like a Queen Bandit sculpture or the Nazi, like the figurative sculptures, like how long do those take? Or like how long does a 30 square foot city, like, you know, how many hours do you spend on these things?
Yeah, it varies. Kumbi Saleh 3020 CE took about 360 hours.
Okay.
Over a month and a half or just under 2 months. And some of the other sculptures I make, like a Nancy, Kweku and Nancy, took about 250 hours. So the figurative artworks tend to take a little bit longer just because despite the fact that I have the ability to really create these works in any way I want, I still adhere to certain anatomical rules.
Right.
And representational rules. Like I want them to be identified as children. I don't necessarily want to augment the forms and change them so much that they're not identifiable as to like what they truly are. And because of that, I have to pay an extraordinary amount of detail to how they're going to be like put together. You know, I could spend several days just like, you know, building a hand and trying different techniques to build a hand. And the same thing that affords me so much flexibility and versatility using a material like Lego elements is the same thing that kind of creates this plethora of problems, because I could use so many different parts to achieve one thing. You know, there's not any one way to do it. And when you're sculpting with a material that is so individually itemized and brought together, you know, it's not like carving from a block of wood or carving from like stone or using found objects. And In fact, actually, it is very much like found objects. That's exactly what it's like, because there's so many different parts, and I'm plucking things up and just saying, okay, let's try this. Will this work as an eye? And then I'll just keep working at it. And then I realize, no, it's not going to work. Not in the way I want it to work.
Right.
And then I got to find a new way to do something. And there's just so many different ways to do it. So it's really challenging, but so intriguing and inspiring, because I never know how something is going to get done. I have ideas about how it's going to get done from experience. I'm like, well, I've used this for hair before, so I'll use it again. And then when I try it this time around, something doesn't sit right. So I'll look for a new part and say, maybe I can use these now instead. And then I try that out, and no, can't, doesn't work. And then try something else. So there's this constant like flux of like trial and error as to how I'm going to achieve what it is I want to achieve. I use photo references online. So I'm drawing sometimes, but not often. I started out as an artist drawing as a kid, and, as an adolescent, that's like the main thing that I knew I could do, is just draw. But even that's what I went to art school for, is like drawing. And then I remember I had this great prof, Judith Schwartz, who became the chair of the art department there. And she was, when you're studying art, you as artists, we tell ourselves we are one thing. I'm a painter. That's what I do. Right. And she's like, and that's great, but try other disciplines, because you never know where your true talent may actually lie. Or it may not be a matter of like one versus the other. It could just be adding more to your artistic resume. You don't have to be just a painter necessarily. You might find that you really like lithography or printmaking, and then you get to diversify your art practice. And that's essentially what I did, is going in for drawing. And then of course I'm like, sculpture is cool. Let me try sculpture. And doing sculpture, I found how much I enjoyed it. And then I made those associations between sculpture and my Lego craft, which I enjoyed, and eventually even used some Lego parts for some art projects that I had in university. And it was from there that I realized, I'm like, hey, there's something here. And then seeing that other people are out there making art using Lego bricks and Lego parts, I said, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it. It's just a matter of applying myself and knowing that it's feasible. So.
And now you have so many things going on that you're building, that you're creating. Like, do you have help in the studio? Do you have other people coming in to do various things for you? Like, what does that look like? When are people coming in to help, and then what are they doing? I'm building more and more staff as I go along. I have artist assistants. My daughter and my niece actually are my most trusted assistants. Right. Perfect.
So it's great. Getting help has been great in terms of increasing production. I used to always bemoan like artists that have like a whole studio of people making their stuff for them. I'd be like, man, you're not making the art, like you got other people making the art for you. But it's so funny, like, experience is often the best teacher, right? So when you experience something, and it also will show you how wrong you are about certain things. And if you want to become a professional artist, I remember reading an article that talked about this, like when you're leveling up, when you want gallery representation or whatever the case, it's like, it's a business. Art is a business. And therefore, if the product is art, then production becomes important. And in this article, they talked about how many sculptures, if you're a sculptor, how many sculptures do you make a year? Gallery is not going to be interested in someone that makes 1 or 2 sculptures a year. Right. Because now you're not just making art for yourself. You're making art that's going to provide for not just yourself financially, but the gallery, your staff, and so many others. So you have to increase production. And if your work is extraordinarily labor intensive and you can't possibly meet the demand just yourself, then you have to bring people in to help you. You have to train those people. There's like a whole process to it. And I'm just learning that now. You learn how poor you are at people management when you start managing people, and I'd say that's probably my biggest challenge, is just wearing all those hats, because I'm a builder, I'm a creator, I'm visionary, that's like what I want to do. That's where my strong suit is creating the things, but not so much in making like studio schedules, being the HR person as well. And like, you got to make sure the documents are signed and did you follow up with those things? Like these are jobs for people. These are full on positions that people occupy, and they study even human resource management and all that stuff. Like I don't do that, so it becomes more and more challenging managing all the various aspects of an art business.
Right.
When you're the sole like creative artist in that enterprise. So, it's the challenge is real, and more, I just strive to get to that place where I can, everything I don't want to do, someone else is doing it. It's like, okay, I need to create a position for a studio manager, and they need to come in and answer all these admin questions, and they need to respond to these things that are happening. So I can be doing the one thing that no one else can do, which is making the very specific art. Yeah. Like I've been fortunate that my assistants are really apt, and they're able to help in so many ways, but there's just certain things that no one else can do but you when you're in an artistic enterprise. And that's where I am. So, learn more, get better organized, and carry on.
Nice. All right. Last question for you. I'd love to know just where you see your art going in the future. What do you want to create next? Like what ideas do you want to develop further? Like what are you working on now, and where do you see that going in the future?
Wow, I have so many ideas for the future. I want to see Building Black Mythos, which is my figurative body of work. I want to see larger scale sculptures. I've had a whale on my mind for so long. When I was in South Korea at Incheon Airport, they have this massive blue whale sculpture in the airport, and it's so fascinating. An orca whale would be beautiful. Something like that. A Nile crocodile, which I didn't even know existed until recently, and that there's crocodiles that can swim like leagues out in large bodies of water in the oceanic.
I had no idea.
I mean, the thought of sharks is scary enough, but the idea that there's crocodiles out there so far from land is terrifying, and they're crocodiles and alligators. They're such fascinating creatures to me because of their prehistoric nature. They're to me, they're the last remnants of dinosaurs on Earth, because they're the only creature that they're reptiles. They look essentially like dinosaurs, but they also existed alongside dinosaurs. Like during those periods, the Jurassic or Cretaceous period, there were these creatures there, and they're still here. Aquatic animals are always so fascinating to me. There's some sharks, I think it's a Norwegian shark, or it has a very particular name. They can live up to 500 years old.
Oh my God.
500 years. Okay. There's sharks that live for 500 years. It's amazing. So with this interest in like aquatic creatures, I know that that's something I really want to explore on a larger scale, and really just, become a part more of contemporary art, like exhibitions, I think I inhabit a very, very unique and particular place because the Lego like products and the Lego group themselves, what I use this material, they're iconographic, it holds this place, the biggest toy company in the world, it's everywhere. And because one of the main aspects about Lego is this recreation aspect, right? Like the intellectual property stuff, right? So, if there's something that exists in the real world, there's likely a Lego version of it somewhere. Someone's building it, or it exists as a product that they've actually put out and are selling. So because of that fact, the work that I make can be seen as like, it can be fascinating, but not just to people that appreciate art, but to this whole other world of people that are just not just, but mainly interested in the material's capabilities and what's been done with the material. But I live in both those worlds where it's not like it's not relegated completely to just like the Lego sphere, but it exists in the fine art world as well. And because I live in that place on the in-between, sometimes I find my work can bend to one more than the other. Depending on the context, it's viewed completely as these fine art objects. And then depending on the online presence, it might get more kind of visibility and praise from people that are just completely interested and like fanatical about Lego constructions and builds. So because I'm in that in-between world, I would like to see my work exist in the fine art context a little bit more. And that just is going to take more of like building and creating works and exhibiting them in those kind of gallery settings and contexts, which is happening. And which I'm very, very, very grateful for. So I see it completely in the trajectory as to what's happening with my work.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, looking forward to seeing what else comes out, what else you're going to create. But
me too.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Thanks for letting us in the studio to see everything that's going on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
All right. I want to thank Ekow again for allowing us to come into his studio and have this conversation. It was great to hear about his life, his art, and what might be coming in the future. And what I really loved more than anything is listening to him talk about stories and myths that influence him in his work. All of that makes me want to learn more about Kumbhe Saleh and medieval African civilizations and everything else that helps tell the story of his work. And I, of course, also love talking about Star Wars and killer crocodiles that are swimming way out in the ocean. But I also appreciate hearing his take on the balance between using Lego elements as a sculptural medium and wanting to be accepted, or wanting that work to be accepted by the fine art world, and how the views of his work shift depending on the context of who is viewing it. But in any case, I'm looking forward to seeing Ekow's work, how it develops and how it is received in the coming years. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from him at the Now conference in July. Art Ed Radio is produced by the Art of Education University with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. As I mentioned in the intro, Ekow will be the featured presenter at the Now conference on July 28th. He'll be talking a lot more about his art, and of course we'll have some incredible visuals to go along with it. He will also be available for live Q&A on the day of the conference, which, as I said, will be July 28th. You can see more about his presentation and all of the other incredible presentations that are part of the conference, and you can register on the AOEU website. We hope to see you there.